Yes, Secretary Johnson, I was one of the 8 Congress members that visited the Dillian Carnes Family Detention Center, and I was horrified by the situation. And I thank you for reevaluating DHS's family detention policy and your announcement yesterday that ICE will generally not detain families if they've received a positive finding for credible or reasonable fear. It's a huge step forward, and I hope it'll bring our policies in line with our international obligation to protect those that are fleeing persecution. The families that I spoke with when I was there were not criminals. They were victims escaping extreme violence. I heard from a mother from Honduras whose son and daughter were forced into the drug cartels. She was raped, as well as her 15-year-old daughter. She and her daughter escaped but ended up in the detention facilities for months. The mother had a credible fear determination, but then she was given a $10,000 bond obligation, which made her desperate because she couldn't afford it, and it might as well have been $1 million because it was unattainable. And then her daughter, in reaction to the desperation, had to be taken to the medical unit for wanting to commit suicide. It's my hope that DHS's new policy means that families like these will no longer be detained and no longer subject to such unreasonable bonds. So, Secretary Johnson, could you describe how the agency will implement this new policy, and how long do you expect the review to take?
Well, much of the reforms that we announced and that I directed are underway already. In terms of the review of the cases, the older cases, that review has already been undertaken, and it has produced results. In terms of the new bond policy, I believe also that that policy has in fact been implemented and is underway. The review that Director Saldana directed of the facilities themselves, the advisory committee, I would have to get back to you in terms of the exact status of that.
In fact,
thank you also for visiting the facility, and thank you for meeting with me after you did so.
Thank you. In fact, I wanted to get more clarity on the bonds for the families. Will ICE continue using bonds for these families, and how will you work to ensure that these bonds remain reasonable for them?
Well, I've directed that they be realistic and be reasonable, and I have asked that I receive regular reports on what bond levels are, and I know that ICE is developing, if they haven't already developed, criteria for setting bonds at a consistent and affordable rate. When I was at one of these facilities, I was struck by the number of people who were there who had a bond set, but they were not able to produce the cash. And so this is one of the things that I want to be sure we set at a realistic rate.
I also wanted to ask about a different detention center. That's Adelanto Detention Center in California. There have been numerous reports documenting inadequate care for the detainees. This facility is run by a private company, Geo Group, and we know that Geo's failure to provide adequate medical care resulted in the death of at least one detainee, Mr. Fernando Dominguez, who was detained for 5 years and died of intestinal cancer several days after he was rushed to the hospital with unusual bleeding. Now, this facility has recently been expanded by 640 beds, and it's of concern considering the history of medical neglect. So, Mr. Secretary, what is ICE doing to ensure that the private companies that it contracts with provides adequate medical care and abides by the ICE performance-based national detention standards?
This is a priority of mine. It's a focus of mine, and I believe it is a priority and a focus of Director Saldana. I've heard concerns raised about private contractors running detention facilities, and I want to be sure that we get this right, both with respect to the conditions and with respect to clarity about lines of authority and responsibility. So when you have a private contractor in the mix, whose responsibility is it day to day? Sure, the conditions of confinement. And so it's something that we're looking into, and it's something I'm very interested in.
Thank you. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields